Goals of language policy. Now, why do states need a language policy? We have ENG 2001, who actually states 7 goals of language policy, and these are quite comprehensive. The first goal is that of identity construction. Developing a national identity is what the states look for. So you have the case of France, for instance, where several languages were spoken, like Basque, Breton, Catalan, and later on it was decided that to maintain or to impose a French identity, only French language should be allowed. You have the example of Canada, where both English and French were presented as official languages when it decided in 1969 to sort of have a kind of a multilingual or more tolerant attitudes towards other languages. But in the case of Quebec, it maintained that it should only have French as a language because they wanted to maintain their French identity. You have the case of Pakistan. Urdu is strongly related to Pakistani or Muslim identity, and that's what galvanized a whole population to lead towards the independence of Pakistan at that moment also. Second thing is ideology. You want to sort of like talk about how important your language is or the history of a language is. For instance, in US, this whole thing about No Child Left Behind was assessed on English language skills. So English language skills become the point or the criteria on which you decide that no child has been left behind in terms of literacy. You have, for instance, the very interesting case of English in Singapore, where English is taught in multiple communities as the language of instruction, yet it is not accepted as a mother tongue. In contrast to this situation, several homes actually do use English as a home language, but in the language policy, it is only seen as a neutral language that is used as a medium of instruction in schools. There was this banning of sign language, for example, in 1880s for the deaf, where they were asked only to learn English, and there was a whole ideology that since the deaf children could not pray, so they could not be salvaged. Then closely related to ideology is the image creation. So when you use your own language as the language in which the government conducts all its businesses, within which education is given to the children, then the prestige of that language also rises. And when the prestige arises, then you sort of develop a kind of pride in your own heritage, in your own whole history, and then your language also is viewed in a favorable way. Similarly, you have an example of US and UK who strongly encourage the use of English. So for instance, if you go for immigration, you cannot possibly have immigration in UK, especially if you do not know English language. Third is image creation, as we said, and then we come to the fourth point, which is related to insecurity. More often than not, states at times feel insecure when different groups speak different languages because they feel threatened by their group identities, and they want to sort of ensure that those group identities do not become so strong that they start to ask for a separate place or separate nation or a separate country. So they want to diminish that, and they are wary of others. And similar is the case of Namibia, where English was introduced as a language, as an official language, and all the local languages were ignored, although very few have access to English in Namibia. And they even let go of German and Afrikaans, which were the post-colonial languages. Then we come to the goal of inequality. This whole thing about language policy is also related to make sure that all groups are treated equally, and you have the example of non-sexist language that came to be used from 1970s onwards. To give you an example of non-sexist language, for instance, instead of saying like chairman, you now say chairperson, because you want to include females who might also rise to that position. You have this Charter for Original and Minority Languages also, which was also in the same spirit of equating educational opportunities for the minorities. The sixth point is related to integration. You want to integrate or bond the groups. You don't want people to sort of become so affiliated within their own groups that they become ethnic enclaves and they do not reach out to each other as a nation. And that is why in 1870s there was this Education Act in which Welsh children in UK were not allowed to use their own language. Then there are instrumental motives. For instance, take the example of Chinese. You're encouraging people to learn Chinese because it is related to economic and social benefits. Take the example of English, for instance, in Pakistan. It is used because it is seen that it is the lingua franca of the world and it connects Pakistan to multiple economic and social opportunities, and you want the people to use it. Now, Fishman says that, apart from these goals also, it all boils down whether you want to have your language which is independent of other languages or it is interdependent on other languages. So you have the case of Osbo, in which if you want to separate your language so much, for instance, that which was the case in Urdu and Hindi, so you make sure the vocabulary is different, the graphology is different, and you separate both languages as two different identities. You want to keep it unique, and you're very careful that it has its own unique identity, and that is why you name it different also, even if it is sort of has certain affinity with another language. At times you would like to purify it. You would not like any other words to enter it. At times you somehow revert to classifying it or classicization of the language. That means you use words which were originally used in a historical period because you simply do not want it to sort of get merged with other language because you want it to be independent of others.